Hi, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live brought to you by Logward, your customizable supply chain orchestration control tower. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I am the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the Blended Pledge, and I'm going to be your host for today. Now, right now, we've got Jonas joining us, and we've got Helge joining us in just a few minutes. We've got some technical difficulties that are happening, but we are going to bring them up as soon as possible. So I'm going to be joined by Jonas from Logward and Helge from Covestro. And so, Jonas, you joined us on Let's Talk Supply Chain back in June for a fantastic episode of, I think it was Thoughts and Coffee. We've also done some podcasts, and we talked about capacity, forecasting, visibility, and transformation across the industry. So, for anybody that missed that episode, can you just introduce yourself? Maybe give us an overview of what you're doing at Logward.
Sure. Thanks for having me again. And hi, everyone participating. Good evening to the Europeans. Just hi to the rest of, I assume, the Americans joining. Yeah, I'm Jonas, CEO at Logward, and what we do there is we call it a supply chain orchestration control tower, which is, as the name would suggest, an orchestration layer to bring all the different stakeholders that companies need to run to work with to run their supply chain together. And we focus massively on no code, so very adaptable, very flexible, and I assume we will topics a bit later. When it comes to functionality, as you already mentioned, lots of our features and functionality focus on managing allocations, managing transports, managing orders, and procuring logistics services.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Now, before I go on, I just want to let everybody know if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments. Let us know where you're from, maybe share something about yourself. And we are going to be addressing some of those questions as we move forward in the discussion today. So, today we're talking about supply chain digitization. I mean, everyone is talking about it, but are we really seeing the results? Well, we know that technology is a strategic imperative for many supply chain organizations. The pandemic really shone a light on the need for increased agility and visibility, and current market conditions have shown the importance of improved efficiency, reduced costs, and creating competitive advantage. Gartner has said that given today's volatile and disruptive environment, supply chain organizations must become more flexible, and the solution is digitalization. And yet, a recent report suggested that a huge 67.4% of supply chain managers admitted to using Excel spreadsheets as their primary management tool. And I hear talk of some logistics companies still using faxes. I mean, at least we're not using typewriters. So we really have a disconnect between what we're hearing and what's actually happening across the industry. So today we're going to talk about why that is, what's really going on, and what we can learn from the mistakes that we've seen, and how we can navigate the process of digitization strategically and successfully. So, Jonas, you and I are going to get started while we wait for Helga. So, let's start with some context. From your perspective, what does the industry look like when it comes to digitization? What's really the truth? I mean, you heard in my introduction, 67% are still using Excel. So, what's actually happening? Tell us.
Um, the good thing is there's happening a lot. There's happening a lot, and let's figure out what's good, where's room for improvement. I think if you look at the current status of supply chain digitization, it always makes sense to look at some numbers. I'm German, we all look at numbers first. And if you do that, you see a lot of interest on supply chain and digitizing it, right? From 2018 to 2022, I personally counted an investment sum from venture capital companies of 55 billion US dollar into different companies. At times, valuations always, especially today, are very volatile, but at times we had 27 new unicorns And those are, for me, some parameters that show there's a lot going on. We had, let's say, very prominent and famous initiatives like IBM and Maersk teaming up to form trade lanes, which has been stopped afterwards. We have seen existing players going on shopping trips, like E2Open acquiring a bunch, CargoWise acquiring a bunch, Maersk becoming an integrator, vertical integrator, others followed. And so a lot of activity around that bubble of digitization in supply chain. And yet, the almost 70% of people using Excel as their primary supply chain management tool that you mentioned. I checked another survey from PricewaterhouseCoopers just recently, asking supply chain managers how happy they are with logistics digitization initiatives, and 83% said we see some movement, but it's behind our expectation or below what we expected. So overall, I think there's a clear gap of what was advertised and what reality is. I think that people can agree on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, let's talk about what has changed and where are we making progress. So, I know that you mentioned there's been a lot of investment into the industry and into the tech space within our industry. And I think we might have Helge. Just give me 1 second before we go on. Hello and welcome, Helge. How are you?
Yeah, a bit stressed out, I must admit. So
well, you're here, and that's all that matters. So before we go on, why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and how Covestro works with Logward?
Yeah, right. Thank you very much, Sarah. And first of all, thanks for having me, and apologies for all the technical difficulties.
We're just glad that you're here.
So, everyone, hello. My name is Helge Remmers. I am 37 years old, married, 2 kids, and I am based and living in Bonn, Germany, so the former capital. I've been with the industry now, and that means supply chain and shipping for the last 13 years roughly. And in that time, I actually went through different roles in different companies. So I started off as an analyst working for a global forwarding company. I went on to do product management as well as global pricing. I went on to work for 2 years in the International Air Transport Association, so IATA, where we developed pricing tools that were supposed to streamline the exchange of pricing between air carriers and forwarders. And for the past 5 years now, I've been with Covestro. For those of you that do not know Covestro, Covestro is a leading polymer, so a chemical manufacturer. So we are solely selling our products and materials business to business. So that might be a reason why you've not heard about the company. But our materials are basically being sold in all sorts of industries. So basically from construction, automotive, healthcare, leisure, sports and leisure, furniture, you name it. So whenever you consider our products, you probably slept on them tonight, right, on your mattress or in your mattress.
Huh. Okay.
It's built in your car. It's probably in the device you're looking at, to your laptop. I'm looking at an iPad now. Your smartphone. So the materials end up in pretty much all sort of products we can imagine. Now, our production is being done in all 3 major regions of the world. So Americas, EMEA, as well as APAC. And we are serving a truly global customer portfolio. So it is a global supply chain, and this is basically where I kick in. So we are, and our department is responsible for the procurement of global transportation services. So that's mainly ocean freight, because products are dense and heavy, but also mostly air freight if things go wrong, like we have seen the last 3 years a lot, and also forwarding services. And this is pretty much where we got engaged with Jonas and Logward. Because there's a lot of need, and we have seen the last 3 years, there's a lot of need to build more resilient solutions to improve your supply chain processes, to improve your procurement, to improve relationships to carriers. And hence we actually invested in started a cooperation then on allocation management. I guess that's why I'm here and late.
Well, and you're here to help share your knowledge. Now, one of the stats that I shared at the top of the show was that 67% of supply chain professionals are still using Excel. And so, one of the questions that I posed to Jonas that Jonas has already answered, but I'd like to hear from your perspective. What does the industry look like when it comes to digitization? What's the actual truth?
Yeah, I would say the actual truth is the buzzword Excel. So that's actually also what I have in my notes here. I believe what we have seen in the last 10 years or a decade or so is that we've seen a lot of freight tech rising, a lot of trends coming our way, especially from shipper's side of view. So we've seen lots of companies developing single solutions for single problems, such as on the procurement side, tendering tools, and we've seen track and trace solutions. We have, basically, all sorts of tools that solve single problems that you did not know you had, right? Really.
Yeah.
If you look at supply chain as a whole, it's basically an interplay of so many different functions and also stakeholders externally. So it starts with the customer, goes via marketing, sales, procurement, operations, and the carrier. It does not really support that interplay of functions and external partners. Right. And this is basically where I would say that my best friend at work is Excel. Because Excel is being used not just as a calculation tool, it's a pretty powerful calculation tool. I personally love it, right? But it's also being used to translate data from one source to the other, right? Because the data standards are not the same, and you're trying to connect them, but they are not. So you're doing it manually, and that to me probably presents one of the greater challenges in the industry at the moment.
Right. Well, and the frustration around downloading, uploading, downloading, uploading, downloading, uploading. Right? Did I just describe, half your day?
Pardon me?
Did I just describe half your day with Excel? Downloading, uploading, downloading, uploading.
I think that's adequate.
All right, Jonas, let's get back to that question that I had asked you before Helge joined us. What has changed? Where are we making progress in technology? I mean, you just heard Helge say he's using Excel, he's downloading, uploading, and it's very manual. And not everything is integrated. And so where are we making progress to make things easier?
I think what really changed during the pandemic is that people all of a sudden care for logistics and supply chain, specifically C-level. That's a good thing. That's a good thing because people kind of like learned the hard way, and I'm saying that without any cynical tone, hopefully. Unfortunately, learned the hard way. What happens if you cut too much of cost and do not care for resilient supply chains. So that's a good thing that now all of a sudden supply chain has become a sexy topic after having been boring for decades, except for those working in it. And I think what's also happening is you have a lot of ambitious and super motivated and highly talented people in supply chain functionalities. So what's happening is if we build on the Excel example that Helge was giving, people are not dumb and people are not lazy. In absence of these holistic solutions that Helge was painting, they came up with something we call shadow IT. This can be something some software applications for one single thing. This can be an Excel file or Excel solution. Because one thing that is super important is what we're talking about here, global supply chains. This is complicated. It is complex. It's not easy. So it's very difficult finding end-to-end plug and play, I hate those buzzwords, solutions. And what's happening in the absence of those is people help themselves. And people helping themselves leads to super fragmented processes. And this ultimately ends in what Sarah described as 50% of Helge's day: uploading, downloading, taking data from here to there, fixing in between. And so what I said as this is happening, it's not necessarily helping the ultimate goal of holistically digitizing supply chains.
Right, absolutely. So Helga, what hasn't changed? Like, where is progress a lot slower than we first thought, or maybe predicted a few years ago? Some of the things that I can really say is blockchain, I think, right? That's kind of quieted down. And then I think also drones. I think it's out there, but that has kind of quieted down as well. So from your perspective, what's been slow to progress?
In general, if you had built those little software or SaaS islands, I think what has been slow exactly is connecting those kind of islands, and this is exactly where our access solutions kick in. So that's probably something that should have been anticipated, but it never happened, right? And at least those solutions should be integrated with your transport management systems or with your ERPs, but oftentimes they are not. I'm not specifically speaking of our company, but that's also what I would hear, what I've learned from my peers. So in general, if you look at supply chains, and Jonas mentioned the last 3 years, supply chains are vastly complex nowadays, especially global supply chains, and as complex as they are, as they are also fragile, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to fix or trying to solve a problem of any sort of event, like a new Suez Canal blockage, for instance, right? Any sort of war, a new pandemic, whatever you have, right? You should be able to quickly basically connect the dots and change the supply as needed, and change your routings or your logistics network as needed. But if you're looking at those single islands across which are not connected, that's fairly difficult. And I think this is where we are still lagging a lot of development.
Yeah, and you used the word fragile, and I think we all really learned that lesson also during the pandemic and through every disruption that has kind of happened during the pandemic and then since then. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the why. What are some of the barriers to supply chain digitization? Why aren't we moving as fast? Helga, let's start with you.
Yeah, usually what comes to your mind first, and I think, Jonas, that's also what you mentioned earlier, is cost, right? I personally do not quite believe that cost is a major barrier or should be a major barrier, because usually whenever you're implementing software, it usually follows a business case, right? And if you're doing the right thing, your business case is supposed to deliver value, right? The project or the implementation is supposed to deliver value, which means your business case should be positive. And that's something that no matter what the budget looks like at the moment, it's basically something you should be still pursuing. So that's pretty much on cost. If you look at change management implementation, I think that's rather crucial, rather a barrier. In how far are people willing to actually change their ways of working? Because everybody loves their Excel, right? They love their little solutions they have built.
They're proud of it.
They are proud of it, yeah, for sure, and for a good reason. But when you're implementing anything, you need people's buy-in. You need the end user to be happy with the solution you're providing, and if that's not the case, then you're basically implementing a dead duck, right?
Yeah,
it should not happen. From an integration point of view, I think this is rather where you see a barrier. So we mentioned, okay, there are great solutions out there. You can buy them. You can buy a great tender tool, for instance, but it needs to be integrated, right? But can you integrate it, or do you have different data standards? And this probably is more of a struggle to get. On the external side, I would say economic factors do not play too much of a role. There are peaks and troughs in the economy. Sometimes a company is doing well, sometimes a bit better, sometimes worse. But there are always times for investment. Right? I'm pretty sure that also in the last 10 years, there have been times for investment, and which might not have been taken necessarily. So, and then there's volatility in the market. And volatility to me is not, it's also not too much of a barrier, but it's more of a driver, something that should be driving innovation, something that should be driving the development of resilience in your supply chain. So the application of tech, right?
Yeah.
Because it has shown you in the last 3 years how volatile how fragile we are at supply chain. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. And then Jonas, do you have anything to add to that? I think for me, it would be IT resources. I hear about that all the time, but I also think about really not understanding what the ROI that you're looking for, right? Because it's not necessarily always money.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I couldn't have said any better what Helge just described. I would double down on the cost or budget not being a showstopper. It can be a limiting factor every now and then. As of, if you ask companies today, money is rather scarce. Yes, budget is rather scarce, but mid to long term, this cannot be a showstopper. More of a slow down factor. But and the points you brought up, sir, are to me they are legit. I would name two things: lack of resources and lack of alignment. Um, so we all know how difficult it is to find proper tech talent. I do not know one single company in this world that says I've got 20 software engineers sitting around being bored. That has never happened to me yet. And so I don't think I need to explain the lack of resources. Lack of misalignment, what I mean is you usually have in the bubble we are moving in, right? So the Covestros of this world, other companies of that size and magnitude, and diversity and complexity. Usually, you have at least regional, if not global, corporate IT initiatives, right? And it's absurd to think that those centralized initiatives are experts in business processes
Hmm.
and domain knowledge. And these two need to be aligned. My global IT strategy, if I'm a CIO or a CDO, I've got a global mandate across everything, not only supply chain management but also sales, R&D, and so on and so forth. But then I need, and Helge mentioned that, the buy-in of the people. Nobody wants to change proactively, at least only a few people. So the time window you have to get their buy-in and the motivation of everyone on the business side is rather small, and this you need to utilize, and that's what makes it very difficult.
Yeah, and you and I have spoken a few times, and you've always said that technology itself isn't it's just not one of the problems. There's a lot of great solutions out there. But you've also said that some of those issues are down to many organizations working backwards. So talk to us about that. Talk to us about why aren't people investing in technology in the right way? Can you explain that to us?
I'll try. So I know for the Europeans joining is rather late, so I don't want to put anyone to sleep by boring them. Stick with me. What we see is
Can't do
something
that.
that we call a three-dimensional or even multi-dimensional conflict of interest. And I know it's a very abstract term, so let me quickly explain. As briefly mentioned before, usually you have a CDO or a CIO or a tech department following some corporate initiatives. That's one dimension, right? So standardization, central governance is key there. Then you do have, and Helge mentioned it, supply chains in our peer group, in our bubble, are super complex and diverse. So you have local requirements clashing with the centralized mandate that usually IT departments have. Supply chains in Brazil are usually being run completely different compared to Japan or the US. Even within business units, you will have differences. And then there's a third component, which is the time to value. You mentioned it, following an ROI, following a value case, patience is low with everyone, with everyone. And then what makes it even harder is the one who exposes herself or himself being the visionary moving forward, saying, hey guys and girls, we need to move, we need to digitize, let's do this. That person is putting themselves at massive exposure, and they have only this short window. So it's a super tense situation. You need to align with local requirements and individual requirements, which is extremely difficult. You only have a little amount of time to not lose buy-in from people. And then you somehow need to make sure, and that's the third dimension, to still, after your digitization initiative, still be able to govern everything from a central corporate point of view. So I have the utmost respect for all the CDOs joining our audience today, working in a global corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've also said that finding the right partnerships is a huge part of the problem as well. And we're going to be talking about this now. Helga, we all know the importance of storytelling. As brands, we have to sell ourselves, but you say that that's actually becoming a problem across the industry and that digital platforms are too often overselling themselves. So talk to us about that. What have you seen? What are maybe some examples, if you have some to share, of that happening, and then what are the results from that?
Mm. Yeah, I would say in general, if a company tries to oversell themselves, I'm not sure if that's really a problem, but if you see large investments in freight tech today, that's a great thing because it shows there's a lot of potential on the one side, and it also shows there's lots of interest to actually more digitize an industry or improve it. So from that point of view, that might be even something positive. Obviously, all these new companies coming up, they are trying to sell themselves, and at least from what I can tell, there's an influx in emails coming in. There's an influx in calls.
Mm.
Or people trying to sell great solutions, and oftentimes what you find is that they are trying to offer you a great solution, promising you the world, and they are solving something that you didn't even know you had a problem with, right? So, and on that front, it's oftentimes selling something without knowing who you are, what your company does, how complex you are, and what problems you have. So from that point of view, it's fairly yeah, and it's a lot of time. It's a waste of time actually to follow up on that. So on that side, you would be better off actually if you can define your problems up front, right, and start looking for solutions, start looking for partners instead of being approached. And it can happen on various levels, right? If it happens on a user level, on a department level, the impact might be not too significant. It might be that you are developing a solution that is supposed to be used by only a smaller group of users, and you're wasting time at the end. The product or the software that ends up not being used at all, and at some point you cancel, you terminate your subscription.
Mm-hmm.
It's not too much of an impact really, but it's definitely not good because you're wasting resources.
Mm-hmm.
It can also happen on different levels, right? It can happen on boardroom level, for instance. And I used to work for a larger corporate that actually started to implement a complete new operational system, so a complete switch of ERP, and that that's the solution they have chosen for whatever reason. It might have been political, but it almost brought that global company to their knees. So they had to write
Wow.
off immense amounts of money and were a target for acquisitions as a result. So the results can be vastly different, but it can have significant financial effect for sure, and also reputational damage. So there's no question about that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's such great perspective, right? Because as brands trying to get into the market, or they're in the market and they're trying to speak to supply chain professionals like you, and better understanding what your problems are, how you're looking to solve them, is, a really huge deal. So Jonas, how does that hype create misunderstanding and misalignment of expectations? I mean, you are one of those brands, right? So when this overselling happens, it doesn't just happen for their brand, it kind of happens to change perspective in a lot of people's minds within the industry. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, the last bit of what you said is to me is key. I mean, whoever has ever worked in sales knows that you got to promote yourself, especially as a young brand, and you do the best you can. And every now and then that leads to overcommitting. I think that's not something that would be unique to supply chain digitization or young companies in supply chains, right? What to me becomes a dangerous size or category of overselling is, and this is where I might put up a small challenge there. I see some risks in the influx of VC injection, VC money coming in the last decade, because the nature of that is if you want to run from funding to funding, you're forced to grow, and you only become attractive to receive VC funding by drawing a picture or a vision of a winner takes it all scenario or disruption.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to get funding as a VC-backed company, you have to sing the song that your audience wants to hear, which is, we'll disrupt this. This will be an end game scenario. We will be the Uber of this or the Airbnb of that. And you can simply not do this in a complex world as global supply chain is. So what from my very personal point of view happened is, there have been some stories out there that were created that led, and you mentioned it, Sarah, to a general narrative of, hey, this will be, I will push this button and magic will happen and all my problems in supply chain will be solved.
Mm-hmm.
That got a huge amount of funding, and now people are disappointed that it doesn't work. Anyone who has worked in supply chain really will tell you, yeah, what a surprise. Yeah, but maybe the funds that bring in the capital and the injections have not done their internship in supply chain. I know I'm sounding a little cynical, but this is, again, and Helge also mentioned it, you are putting the motivation of the bubble of the supply chain experts at risk, because they will end up in a situation in which they will feel, oh, okay, there's this digital platform number 27 that does exactly the same than the other 26, and there's number 32, and the first 31st they have all failed, and now 32 will make it. So this is let's say, people are a little tired of that, I would assume. And this is, I hope I'm making sense in my reasoning, and the impact of that.
Well, and do you think that that's slowing industry progress? Like, how do you feel about that?
I mean, surely, because I mean, it's my daily life. I have to. I'm being challenged every day with that, right? And legitimately so, right? You somehow have to prove that you're not player number 102 that tries the same thing over and over again. We usually say, okay, there's no venture capital money in Logward, but yeah, it's definitely slowing it down. It's not a showstopper, but it's a hassle. It's a hassle.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I want to say hi to Larry over on my personal LinkedIn. I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them in the comments. Helge is only here with us, and so is Jonas, only here with us until the top of the hour. And I want to make sure that we get to all your questions, because we're really diving deep into the top 5 lessons around supply chain digitization. So Helge, what can organizations do? How can they determine if a brand is overselling? Now, this is a big question, right? Because everybody's looking at technology. Everybody's having conversations with potential partners. And a lot of them are wondering if they're asking the right questions.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very hard to determine if somebody's overselling to you or not until you actually end up in a user acceptance testing or any sort of testing. But probably before that, I would always be careful when you're being approached. So when it's rather a push from the other side rather than a pull from your side, let's say it's rather helpful to determine your problem, to create a problem statement yourself first, and then be on the hunt yourself for a solution. So you make sure that actually the solution is built for purpose, exactly what you need for. Then get information from your peers, right? Speak to other people in the industry, speak to any sort of contact that might have been in touch with this company you're speaking to or you're talking to, right? Try to get financial information of that company.
That's important.
Just try to get a most realistic picture of the company and what it's trying to achieve. Jonas mentioned that there are a lot of venture capital funding companies that are basically created just to sell quickly, right? But how long is a company going to last? That's also a question you would need to ask yourself. And lastly, when you are in touch, when you think you have found a legit company and solution, sit together, be sure that they understand what your business is doing Do not just try to understand what their product is, what they're selling you, but also make sure that these guys understand what you are doing and what problems you are trying to solve, because that might actually prevent any sort of misunderstanding later on, right? And last but not least, when you're there, run a proper UAT. Yeah, just do that.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, and your point about the financials, that is a huge one. I was just talking to a few people over the last couple of days at a conference that I was at, in the fact that you need to know, where the partners are right now and where they're going to be in the future and how stable that environment is. So that's a huge one. Now, you mentioned some of the questions that they should be asking. Are there any other questions that they should be asking those partners that you can think of to share with us? Helge.
Yeah. Well, when you are in touch with a company, ask for referrals, right? Ask for other companies that they are working for, where they implemented similar products, similar services, and try to speak to those companies. Also ask, okay, be open. Are you the first customer? Are you the anchor customer, so to speak? Which is okay to be, right? But just be aware that you might be investing more time, but you can also customize maybe product or solution. Yeah, be sure about the financials. If it's VC funded, okay, make sure for how long that funding is going to last, right? And also what's the plan for the company? You do not want to invest in a solution that's good for 3 years and all of a sudden it disappears from the market, right? That's also no good. So I guess those are a couple of things you would need to consider here.
Perfect. Now, Jonas, I want to bring you into the conversation. How do they determine the correct scope of work? So that's another big question, other than asking the right questions, right? Scope of work is a really big deal as well. So how do they go about doing that?
In theory, it's very easy. In reality, it's extremely difficult to execute. But the simple answer is involve domain. You got to involve your business process owners, and there's no way around it. If I mean, again, I'm getting back to. I hope we don't bore people by always using the same keywords, but the buy-in from business side is critical, and you will not get a proper scope of work from anyone who's not involved at least weekly, if not daily, into business operations. So when working out the scope of work, it's absolutely crucial to involve those. And Helge mentioned it, is UAT. You have to involve the users, otherwise you're set for failure. Now, what sounds super simple in theory is one of the most challenging things in real life. Because and again we're running in cycles, we're in a very complex world, and sometimes only after a couple of weeks or months you figure out, oh, okay, this we didn't think of and this has to be different, and that's the reality we're dealing with and we're in, but there's no shortcut.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's no shortcut in supply chain, so there shouldn't be any shortcuts with trying to find good technology partners either. So I like that. And so, Helge, what are sort of the top 3 ways that we can make a business case for technology? What's worked for you in the past?
What worked for me in the past is to start always with your problem statement. And the 3 things that I usually follow is the situation, the complication, and the solution. So that has basically helped me through all business cases, but all through my business life. So that's probably a good thing. So how do you start with that? Okay, you need to define what's the setup. So that's sort of the situation that you're in, and then basically creating a bit of transparency on the problem. It's the hardest part: quantify your problem, right? So what is the cost that incurs due to a problem? What revenue are you missing out on? How much time is wasted, right? How does that wasted time translate into redundant work, into FTEs, again, into cost? So you need to run the numbers for that. That's absolutely crucial. So that's basically the first thing here. Later on, when you look at the project and the project implementation, what's your CapEx, what's your OpEx? So how much of an investment you would need to take, right? What's the cost for the implementation? What's the cost for the project? And later on, what's the cost to run the solution? Do you need additional FTEs? Do you need any sort of additional resources, what are subscription fees if you're into a SaaS or something, and put that against each other and hope or pray that it's positive what comes out of that, right? So that's running the numbers, and on the other side, I would say be aware of any sort of indirect impacts, and also indirect impacts can be quantified and can be put into that business case to help you support getting a positive number here. And last but not least, I would just recommend that you are being extremely transparent with your business cases and honest, right? Do not tweak the numbers just because you like your idea. That's usually not leading you anywhere, right? So be very transparent, because at the end, if you are the person creating the business case, you're most likely also the business owner standing in and putting your head in the block, so to speak.
Yeah, the responsibility, all the weight is on your shoulders. So I know that tackling these issues is important to you at Logward. So how do you work with companies that seemed, set up for failure? Maybe they didn't choose the right platform or didn't get the training that they needed. How are you helping to change that or maybe reverse the damage? Jonas, I'm going to start with you and then I'll go to Helge.
Sure. I mean, basically, we try to execute on everything that I was shouting out beforehand, right? Reach out to the business owners, to the business users, talk to them. At Logwood, we have a dedicated team to do that, a professional service team to deliver. And their very first job is to understand the business as best as they can. And once you've done that, once you do have a proper understanding, or at least close to a proper understanding of a scope of work, of the problem statement, of the value case, or business case, as Helge was calling it, then what we like to do is to run in very small iterations. Earlier on, I said that we focus very much on no code, meaning we want to have tangible pieces of software for the business users as fast as we can. So we have been very critical with VC startups in this conversation so far. Let me also, cut them some slack or give them some credit. I think what's coming from that bubble is the term fail fast, and that's what we try to do. We want to try to fail as fast as possible, to learn from business users. Hey guys, this is not what we wanted, and we can take it back to the workshop and work towards a way that works for the business users. And having that no-code approach there is super helpful, because we do not need a team of a gazillion software engineers to customize everything. A digital native is fully sufficient to drag and drop a solution that works for the business users. And I know it's a very generic answer. I'm sorry for that, but that's just how we do it. Because you described the setup of of companies who may have failed in their digital endeavors, and they would all look differently. So we try to understand the picture that we're dealing with, and then we try to be operating as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Helge, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I can basically agree with that. I would say if you see that you're set up for failure, or that things are not going the right way during, for instance, an implementation phase, I think in order to save that, basically all hands on deck. So very, very intense cooperation between the service partner and the business owner. Not to lose the users at the end, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's worth it. It's worth it spending some extra effort in those kind of times before you actually have to start writing off software, or it's being implemented as a dirt duck. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are there any red flags that you would say when you start to work with a technology partner that you would say that people would need to look out for? I mean, I know if you're going to be bringing together all the internal stakeholders, obviously communication is a really big one. And if somebody is uneasy with something or not liking something, you have to have a safe space to have those conversations early. But a lot of times when we think about personal relationships, right, we think about going with our gut. Is there something like that we can go with during a technology implementation that just sort of raises the hand and goes, you know what, guys, this might not be okay.
I mean, going with your gut probably is usually good advice. Probably also when you start implementing software, you would notice quickly if things go right or wrong. Also, you would quickly notice if you are in a honest relationship with your supplier or not. If they are available, if they're open to communicate, right? If that changes, I would be a bit cautious.
What about having somebody to pick up the phone and call? Because I've mentioned this before on the show. I work with a lot of different technology platforms, not for supply chain, but for other things. And when I have a problem, sometimes I can't even pick up the phone and call. I have to, either have just a chat, or I have to send in, a ticket or something like that. And it goes for like 3 or 5 days. So I think that would be a key one, right? Is to have somebody that you can talk to, or
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You need to have good context, and they need to be responsive, right? So you also need to see progress. So if you even if it's about smaller problems, you can see, okay, how much effort are these guys really putting in or not, right? So you would see progress, and as long as you see that, I think you're on a good track, and you are in a good business relationship, right?
absolutely. So, Jonas, can you share some examples or maybe a case study with us?
Yeah, lots. If you want to narrow it down, I'll be happy following your lead. You mean, are we talking about implementation, or are we talking about
Yeah, let's talk about an
functionality?
example or maybe a case study you have at Logward where you have stepped in, you've helped them solve a problem through your technology, and then what was the ROI and benefit?
Yeah, so I mean, we're sitting in this group, obviously, talking to an expert from the chemical industry. So maybe if I want to drop some more examples, we've also got plenty of customers from consumer goods area, and for the German audience, there would be some very traditional brands who are very German in their behavior, and I mean this with all the positivity that you could put into that statement, because it's a rather careful approach, right? So the typical customer of ours approaches us with and Helge mentioned it, with a pretty properly described scope, a rather tiny scope, and then they put us, to work. Then they want to test us. That scope usually is really like a tiny POC, or let's explore this or that. And thankfully, the vast majority of those cases, which started super small, can be an order management. Like, let's track our incoming orders. It can be a transport booking setup. It can be, as in Helge's case, carrier allocation management. So it doesn't matter which case, but usually customers approach us saying, okay, this is a tiny bit we want to explore with you. And you can look up some logos on our website. It ended up in building fully blown orchestration layers for our customers, really integrating more than 100 suppliers and freight forwarding partners and customers, integrating their warehouses, really going from sales order intake, via submitting purchase orders at your suppliers, to consolidating those, to then executing transports that you form out of your orders, following up and monitoring those transports, documenting them, collaborating with them on them with your partners. So it goes a long way, and usually our customer success stories start very, very, very small.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those. Now, the title of this is Top 5 Lessons. So talk to us about what we can learn from everything that we've talked about today. Helge, what are your top 5 lessons for navigating supply chain digitization? And then Jonas, we'll go to you.
All right, great. Because it was a title, I took some notes here, so I have the beauty. So first of all, I would say define your needs first, right? Run a problem statement and see how you can actually apply or use software to enhance existing processes. So that's first. So it should be rather a pull for you for technology than a push from a provider. Secondly, when you're doing that, do not try to replicate existing processes by just using software doing the same thing as you're doing today. Right? That's not really going to help or make or create a lot of value. Right? Try to figure out how software or how SaaS solutions or whatever can actually improve your processes. Right? How can you become better? Then we spoke about that earlier on. Do not build single software islands that are not connected, right? That are not even connected to your ERP, because you will end up in sort of an IT landscape that's extremely difficult to maneuver. The fourth step, and I think, Jonas, you mentioned something very similar just now, start small, right? Start small, but have sort of a vision where a solution can grow over time. But if you start small, you can have a smaller scope. It's easier to implement. It's easier to convince a user, for instance, and you will be faster in delivering a success story. And if the first step is a success, you can build on that, right? So that would be a way to go. And number 5 for me is get users buy-in. Period. That's one of the most crucial points. Yeah, it goes and falls with those people.
Yeah, such great lessons and, and such a good blueprint when you're looking to go into this, or maybe you're in the middle of this, right? Thinking about and going back to those things and making sure that you've thought about these things as you're moving forward, or maybe you just need to go back and talk to the internal stakeholders, right? The technology partner, and just reiterate some of these important things that we need to talk about before we can even implement. Jonas, was there anything that you wanted to add to those?
Yeah, I'm happy that we're pretty much aligned on our top 5 takeaways. I won't be able to add that much new. I would have called it maybe slightly differently. It's run in iterations. That's what we always try to convince our customers to do. As Helge said, get the buy-in of the business process owners, involve them very early on in opposite order, involve them very early on, ensure that they are brought into everything. Then scope properly and be agile, because things can be messy. Things can bring up challenges. So for us, it's always very important to then not stop everything, but be agile and try to move around that challenge that might come up.
Well, and one of the things that we haven't talked about is, how do you define success of a supply chain digitization strategy, or maybe an implementation? Helge, I'm going to start with you. How do you define what that success is? Because I think too many times we feel like we are headed towards a destination, but really this is just a journey, right? And we don't want to get discouraged. We want to keep going in that journey. So how do you define success?
Well, you can certainly measure the hard facts. For instance, in your business case, is once you implement a business as a solution, are you proving the business case right or not? But soft facts, for instance, will be also to look at the people, right? If you have happy users of whatever you have implemented, you have probably done a good job, because the user is going to notice if they are saving time, if they're getting better or appropriate information from something, if they can generate better savings or sales, no matter what the function is, right? And the solution we're talking about. So that would be one measure, basically, or one soft measure, if I can put it that way. And then surely you will notice that if there's an appetite for more, right? If the company, the business owner, the user is willing to actually extend on that initially built solution, and you're probably set up the right way.
Yeah, awesome. Jonas, how do you think supply chain professionals should define success of a supply chain, digitization strategy?
I feel the urge to apologize to the audience, because again, Helge has
I knew this was gonna
has been
happen.
spot on. But look, we're Germans. We're not very talented when it comes to being full of humor or creative or whatever. So I would just repeat the very, very sober, very very down to earth statement. You start the whole thing with a value case, you end the whole thing with a value case. So if you meet the value case, it's a success. And then, as I said, there most probably will be appetite for more
Well,
to step into continuous improvement journey.
well, and define what the ROI is at the beginning, right? It's not
Yeah,
always
that to me
money.
is part of
So,
it.
you know, what are those top things that you're trying to achieve, and getting the feedback from the team and things like that will get you to where you need to be when you're looking at the success of a strategy. Now let's look into the future. So Jonas, we're going to start with you and end with Helge. What will supply chain digitization look like in 2024? Get out those crystal balls.
So I do not see that much significant change, because I mean it's always my story, right? Technology has been the same for the last 10 years. All tech talent people who will end up in my DMs, feel free to challenge me, but I keep saying technology is not the main differentiator, even though in all the panels and speeches I've been invited to during the last 10 years, I was asked about blockchain, I was asked about deep learning, I was asked about machine learning, and now it's AI, which would be maybe the only technological aspect that I would mention. But apart from what AI might be doing, I see budgets being a little tighter, so it's a little more difficult to plan your digitization journey. Um, Supply chains have become even more complex throughout the pandemic. The challenges that we had have only gotten harder to overcome. But I do not see, from a technology point of view, a groundbreaking change. What we have seen as obstacles will become harder. The need for resilience will even grow. So let's say more of the same.
Great. Thank you, Jonas. And Helge, last but not least, what do you think 2024 is going to look like?
Yeah, I don't want to be. I'm not a pessimist per se, but I would agree with Jonas in that sense that there's not going to be any significant changes here. Yes, budgets most likely are going to be a bit tighter next year, because throughout the economy is not doing too great, which means also financials are not that great with the companies. But what I would, what I truly trust is that supply chain has become a matter of intention. So it's a boardroom topic, it's differentiated. And therefore, I would still, I'm actually convinced that there will be actually more investments going into supply chain rather than in other business functions, depending on how you plan to distribute them. So from that point of view, I would believe that actually building resilient solutions in your supply chain is still on top of the agenda, or high up the agenda. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Helge and Jonas, you have spilt the tea for us today. You've given us so many things to think about, top lessons. And as we head quickly into 2024, companies must separate the hype from the underlying applicability and value creation of new tools and solutions if they are going to achieve true supply chain digitization. Organizations need to bring the focus back to what digitization should be achieving: effortless integration, visibility, collaboration, and data-driven insights that boost productivity and reduce costs. And if you're looking for the perfect partner to help you achieve all of this, then look no further than Logward. Visit logward.com to find out more, book a demo, grab some resources, and even a freebie or two. Thank you so much to Jonas and Helge for joining me today and bringing the power of positive partnership to life. And a final thank you to all of you for watching and listening. I will certainly see you soon. Thank you so much, Jonas and Helge. Have a good day, everyone.